where the heck is it? I wrote a program in this language, in this Max language called Red Panda. And so I started out with, so the thing I liked about it was in this thing, I basically doodle, and it plays what I doodle. These are step sequencers. But I can also draw in here to change the sound. You know, I can do all this kind of stuff. And basically what I do is I just draw and improvise, and I use a Wacom tablet. I use one of those drawing tablets. You know, but I do the same thing with the drums. So I can do stuff like this. You know, so I'm drawing a trajectory through a drum loop. Yeah, so if you do...
Nice.
Yeah, it's cool, right?
Yeah. Today's show is brought to you by DLO.com, Digital Lifestyle Outfitters. They have iPod solutions to help you enjoy your iPod experience. From car docks to nano gear to iPod shells, and of course, the always cool Home Dock Deluxe. Visit DLO.com. Joining me today on the Culture Catch, Luc DuBois, right here in the building where the Manhattan Project went down so many years ago. I think the radiation is still permeating, even though there are rumors that there was no radiation. But do we believe the government?
I don't know. I don't know.
Luc was kind enough to invite us into his lab, studio, workstation, office, and share with us his time-lapse phonography today on the Culture Catch. We know that you've actually been writing some amazing software programs that interface music and art. And you've coined this term, time-lapse phonography, as kind of your artistic statement to the world. When you were growing up in the UK, well, I guess coming of age in the UK would be a better term. Were you gravitating towards the bands that were a little bit more experimental, like Throbbing Gristle and?
I was doing a little bit, yeah. The real like epiphany I had, I think, was in my you know, I was in high school. I was in like the high school jazz band, and in a closet, sort of completely disused. I got in trouble for something, and the sort of punishment was I had to help my band teacher kind of go through the big closet in the back and help him sort out all the stuff. I had to come into school on a Saturday, and there was an ARP. There was this old synthesizer, and he kind of didn't know what the hell it was, and I had no idea what it was. And we sort of plugged it in, and you know, it uses these little phone cables, and we just sort of started plugging stuff in. And it was very cool, and I kind of forgot about it, and sort of put it out of my mind. And then when I got to New York, my freshman year at Columbia, my girlfriend worked up here, and this is the Computer Music Center at Columbia. And at the time, it was all analog. There was basically no computers. It was still called the Electronic Music Center. And she played these Buchla synthesizers, these phone patch bay synthesizers. And so I kind of just fell in love with them. I started learning how to play them and do all this stuff. And
for people out there that don't know, those were some of the synthesizers used on the early Pink Floyd records.
Yeah, and Silver Apples of the Moon, Morton Subotnick, and you know,
Wendy Carlos,
all sorts of people would use these things. And this machine behind us is sort of the original animal of that. This is the RCA Mark II synthesizer, which was built in 1957 in collaboration with Columbia and Princeton universities. This is the first electronic music center in the Western Hemisphere. And you know, there are a bunch of kind of rumor, sort of funny stories about it. And one of them is that Ussachevsky and Luning, the two composers here, basically conned RCA into building it by saying, you know, if you build this thing to our specifications, it will replace the symphony orchestra within 10 years. And RCA, you know, they had a union radio orchestra. They were like, hey, yeah, absolutely. We will absolutely build this for you. And so, you know, like $250,000 later, there's this thing. And it's, you know, it's 400 and something vacuum tubes. It's like bolted to the floor. It makes 4 notes at once. You play it with a paper tape drive, and it doesn't even really work in real time. The way they would do it is it would write a shellac record. There's a record lathe. And then you would go in the next room and listen to it and be like, oh, I messed that up, and you come back here and fix it. And within, you know, maybe like 5 years, this thing was completely obsolete. You know, because they had transistorized, and then they went to these Buchla and Serge and Moog and ARP and all that stuff. And so by the time you get into the 60s, this thing is kind of a dinosaur. but it's really
was
neat.
it ever used on anything, Luke? Any
Yeah.
recordings? Did they actually slave maybe
yeah.
pour those notes into something?
Yeah, there are a couple pretty famous kind of art music pieces from the period. Milton Babbitt used it for this thing called Vision and Prayer, and this other piece called Philomel. This guy Charles Warren used it for a piece called Times Encomium that won like the Pulitzer Prize and I don't know, 1962.
Interesting. In music, he won the Pulitzer.
Yeah. So a few people used it, but it's incredibly obtuse and very difficult to use.
So now it's your hip backdrop.
Yeah, now it's our hip backdrop, and it's the hip backdrop for the director, Brad Garton, this is sort of the office we all share. And so he hangs out in here. And,
so you're in school, and were you a pianist? Was that your...
No, I was a really lousy bass player. I was a really, really lousy bass player. I was in a lot of punk bands. I was in a lot of hardcore bands. It was weird, I owned like a Casio CZ1 or something, that I would use just to make like just bad bass sound noises sometimes.
That was very Devo.
Yeah, it was very Devo. I didn't really, but I wasn't really like really engaged with the technology till I got to college, and then it just kind of exploded. And originally, with the analog gear, with these old patch-based synthesizers, it was really gestural, and I really just thought it was great to be like plugging phone jacks in and flipping switches. And
so it had a punk aesthetic.
It had kind of like a punk aesthetic, and I would just improvise. And I was in a band, my senior year I started a band with some really good friends of mine called the Freight Elevator Quartet. And it was a live improvised kind of dance music group, and we had a cellist and a didgeridoo player, and Stephen Krieger who programmed drum machines.
Nice.
And I would do these analog synths, and we would just improvise. And it was really fun, except those synthesizers always break.
Right.
They always break. And my favorite story is, we were playing down at Bleecker Street at like the Elbow Room.
Sure. I
don't know when the heck this was. This was in 97 or 98. And we found out that like depending on whether the light switch was on in the women's room, my entire rig would like drop current, and like the whole thing would just slow down and start going like some weird interval. Yeah, so it'd be like and some like woman would have to pee, and then it would go and then she would leave the room and go and so that was kind of unacceptable. And then we had a gig at the Kitchen like a few months later, and I was like, you know what, we're going to use a computer because I can't take this anymore.